It was dark, it was cold, and it was tight. Gabriel had already been down there for hours and hours in the freezing darkness. His shoulders began scraping the sides. There was barely enough room to breathe, and almost no space to move. Have you heard this amazing story? Oh, well, I have to tell you. Imagine hearing a child crying from underground for 11 straight hours. Not trapped in a room and not stuck in a car, but he was trapped 50 feet below the earth inside a narrow well so tight even firefighters couldn't get inside. And then suddenly, after all hope was almost gone, a 14-year-old boy steps out quietly from the crowd and says, "I'll go." Now here's the really terrifying part. They didn't lower him in some fancy rescue machine. They didn't tie a rope around his waist and make a little, seat for him. They tied a rope around his ankles and strapped a flashlight to his forehead and then lowered him headfirst into the darkness. And yet, amazingly, this teenager came back carrying the child alive in his arms. So let's talk about this unbelievably true story of Cristian Marian Becheanu. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Daniel Tells Stories, the channel where we dive into real stories from around the world that are emotional, intense, inspiring, and honestly sometimes feel impossible to believe. And today's story is one of those that make you instantly stop and think, what would you do in that situation? Because this story is not like a movie. There's no trained superhero in this. This is the story of a normal teenager who faced something so terrifying that even adults were afraid to do it, and somehow found the courage to go anyway. So if you really enjoy real survival stories, local hero stories, kindness stories, and unbelievable true events, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because every week we talk about stories that stay with you long after the video ends. As well, we're so close to getting 500 subscribers, so help me out in doing that. After this video, make sure you definitely check out the other content, because there's so many powerful and emotional true stories just waiting for you on this channel. So, alright, let's get back to our story and talk about what happened in Romania in 2013. Before this rescue even happened, Cristian Marian Becheanu was just a 14-year-old boy in a small town in Romania, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. And honestly, what matters is that when people imagine heroes, they usually picture trained adults, not a little skinny 7th grader walking home from school. Cristian wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, and people even described him as quiet and humble teenager. But even before the well rescue, there was already signs that he had reacted differently during emergencies. You see, years earlier, he had reported helping victims trapped in a car accident and also helped an injured classmate after a bicycle crash. I mean, some people freeze during moments like that, or some people will wait for someone else to act and look around. Where are they? But Cristian moved towards danger instead of running away from it. And nobody standing there that day knew that this teenager was about to become the only real chance for a trapped little boy who was in the well. So here's where the nightmare begins. A 3-year-old named Gabriel somehow fell into a deep, narrow well near his family home. Now, when people hear the word well, they sometimes imagine something wide enough to climb into. No, this was not that. This was basically a vertical shaft underground, barely wide enough for a thin teenager to squeeze through. And it was about 15 meters deep. It was dark, it was cold, and it was tight. And somewhere down there, a terrified little boy was crying. Now imagine the scene, of course, going above ground. You have parents screaming, running around, neighbors gathering, trying to figure out what to do. Firefighters are rushing in, everyone desperately trying to figure out how to save this child before it was too late. And the worst part? They could still hear Gabriel crying underground. Honestly, hearing a trapped child and not being able to reach him, or even anytime you have a trapped child anywhere, it's like torture. I mean, rescue crews tried everything. They brought equipment, they dug around the shaft, a tractor was used, all kinds of different methods they tried to do for the hour upon hour as Gabriel was in the well. But nothing worked. And slowly the atmosphere started to change. At first, people probably believed the rescue crews would save him quickly, so they weren't really that worried. But as time went on, fear began to creep in, because adults physically could not fit inside the well. This was a horrifying reality. Even trained firefighters were too big. And if someone got stuck halfway down, then there would be 2 people trapped. So every minute mattered. Gabriel had already been down there for hours and hours in the freezing darkness. And even after 11 exhausting hours, one firefighter finally admitted that everyone had already started fearing, well, there's no more hope, the well is too narrow, we don't know what to do. Honestly, imagine you're hearing that if you're Gabriel's parents. I mean, that is completely devastating and life and soul crushing. Now here's the part that sounds a little bit unbelievable and like a movie scene. Cristian had been standing nearby watching the rescue attempt along with everybody else. Still a kid himself. But when adults began running out of options, Cristian stepped forward. Now imagine how terrifying that moment is. This wasn't after the rescues proved that this place was still safe. This was after trained adults nearly lost hope. Apparently, all the other volunteers that already looked down the shaft and began to back away. And honestly, who would blame them? I mean, imagine staring into a tiny hole in the earth, knowing you'll be lowered headfirst into the darkness, and you can barely fit there. I mean, that's, realistically horrifying. But Cristian quietly said he would do it. Of course, later he admitted he was quite scared, but still, he chose to go. And that's what real courage is, not being fearless. Moving despite the fear. And this is where that rescue becomes unbelievably intense. Firefighters tied a rope around Cristian's ankles. Not advanced equipment, not some professional harness, just a rope around his feet. And then they strapped a headlamp onto his forehead and lowered him head first into that well. Can you imagine this? An entire town standing silently around a hole in the ground where a 14-year-old boy disappears upside down. This image alone seems unreal, and I'm sure Gabriel's family was freaking out. And the deeper Cristian went, the tighter and tighter it became. His shoulders began scraping the sides. There was barely enough room to breathe, and almost no space to move. And the firefighters themselves were terrified he might get stuck as well, meaning this rescue would suddenly become even a bigger disaster. Cristian had to keep his arms stretched forward because there was no room to reposition himself. There was no room to panic. There was no room to turn around, and there was no room to fail. And somewhere deep, deep, deep underground, he finally reached Gabriel. Now imagine that moment emotionally. I mean, you can hear the orchestra swell at that point. The little child trapped alone in the darkness for 11 hours suddenly sees another human face appearing from above. And the face did not belong to an adult rescuer, but another kid. So Cristian grabbed Gabriel. People above slowly begin pulling them both up together. Imagine everyone waiting around that well, completely silent. Parents crying softly, rescuers staring downward, people holding their breath. The entire town just frozen in time. And then suddenly, they appeared. Cristian emerged from the shaft with Gabriel alive in his arms. Of course, the crowd exploded. People were screaming, they were crying, they were cheering, they were going around dancing, trying to figure out how to show their joy and their happiness. For after 11 straight hours of fear and hopelessness, the child had survived. Gabriel was rushed to the hospital and thankfully survived the whole ordeal. So after the rescue, Romania embraced Cristian as a hero. And honestly, how could they not do that? A 14-year-old boy had done something that even trained adults physically could not do. News stations covered the story everywhere. People called him Gabriel's saving angel. But what makes this story even more powerful is how Cristian acted afterwards. He didn't have any arrogance, he had no ego, and when people asked him about the rescue, he just simply said, "I did what had to be done." And honestly, that sentence says everything about him. Cristian received awards and national recognition. He even became the only civilian ever rewarded Romania's highest emergency rescues honor. And people were not moved just by the rescue itself, they were moved by the simplicity of it. Here's a young man not seeking fame, not seeking attention, just somebody doing something terrifying because another human being needed the help. Now here's my favorite part of this whole story. Cristian eventually became exactly what he had dreamed about. which was a firefighter. Years later, he officially joined Romania's emergency rescue services and today serves professionally as Sergeant Major Cristian Marian Becheanu. And honestly, that feels like the perfect ending. Because the teenager who was willing to go underground and save a trapped child will always become the kind of adult who runs towards emergencies instead of running away from them. And beyond that, his life changed personally too. He got married and became a father himself. And even now, that rescue video is still resurfaces online here and there because people can't believe what they're watching. A 14-year-old boy lowered headfirst into the darkness, only with rope tied around his ankles. I mean, this sounds impossible. But, believe it or not, it actually happened. You know, what really stays with me about Cristian's story is the fact that the real heroes we often look for are so completely ordinary and they're just right there when the moment arrives and we need them. Cristian wasn't famous. He wasn't highly trained. He was just a 7th grader standing in a crowd. And when everybody else reached their limit of what they could do, he stepped forward. And honestly, that's what makes this story affect people so deeply even today. Because it reminds us that courage doesn't have to always come from the strongest person in the room. Sometimes it comes from the quiet kid nobody expected. So that's the story of Cristian Marian Becheanu, the Romanian teenager who volunteered to be lowered headfirst into a narrow well and saved a trapped 3-year-old child after rescuers had lost all hope. He faced fear most adults could not handle, and he risked getting trapped underground himself. But yet he came back carrying another child alive in his arms. Truly, this is real heroism. So let me ask you, before this video ends, if you were standing there in that day looking into that dark well, would you have stepped forward? Well, this 14-year-old boy did. And because of that decision, another child got to grow up. So remember, if this story moved you, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new here, subscribe to Daniel Tells Stories for more emotional, intense, and unbelievably true stories from around the world. And remember, I'm almost at 500 people. Please subscribe. Definitely check out my other videos too, because there's so many incredible stories just waiting for you on this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Bye.